Hi, my name is Martin Davis. This question is for Secretary Norton. I was just wondering, how do you square your statement that you and Shell are seriously concerned and committed to reducing greenhouse gases, and then essentially in the same breath talk to us about the efforts that you're involved with in Canada and Western Colorado, trying to extract oil from shale, et cetera, when there is sort of broad consensus in the scientific community that these efforts produce more greenhouse gases than traditional efforts at removing fossil fuels, such as crude oil. And just would like to hear your comments on that. And I guess the second question is, what percentage of the total energy portfolio of Shell is actually wind or solar as opposed to traditional fossil fuels?
I'll say I don't know the answer to that last question. I do know that we have, for example, in the United States, 6 different states where we have wind energy facilities, and we're working on expanding that area. But it's not something that we've been in for a long time. It's very much a growth area within the Shell portfolio. As to the unconventional oils, both oil shale and oil sands, what we're looking at is having options available. And so that means we're looking at the renewables, we're looking at unconventionals, we're looking offshore, onshore, all of those different kinds of things. Oil shale in Colorado is very much at a research and development phase today. And as we are looking at the research, we're looking at those things that can be done to reduce the environmental footprint, to make sure that we are taking into account the water and the air quality issues, the carbon issues. And so that is something that we're factoring into our thinking process as we're going along right now. And so we want to explore a whole variety of different approaches to see how we can meet the energy demands. And so these are things that will allow us to have the knowledge, the scientific knowledge, and the ability to bring those online if those are what makes sense after we learn more about the technology.
Yes, I'd like to just comment on a good role for government in responding to the way the market should select among these options, and that is the low carbon standard for fuels that was enacted in California, which mandates that by 2020, the average greenhouse gas emission rate for the transport fuels sold in California shall be 10% less than it is at the present time. And it does not dictate to the private sector what the technology should be, but that's what has to come out of the mix of the technologies. And if you have some technologies that are more or less carbon intensive, this kind of initiative, which is a very good one in my mind, is going to enable the market to separate the sheep from the goats.
There's another interesting
that type of scenario. One of the things we've already mentioned is carbon capture and storage. And the government needs to do some things to help create a framework for that. Right now, it's not clear what the regulatory system for that is, what the subsurface ownership system is for that. There are a lot of issues around carbon capture and storage that still need to be addressed. But that's one of those things that can help in leveling the playing field as you're looking at the carbon footprint of various different types of energy.
Another interesting example of a good law, they do happen sometimes, just came out in connection with the enthusiasm of a few people in the Air Force and Navy for buying lots of coal-to-liquids synfuels, as if DOD had a problem of oil availability. Well, actually it doesn't, because it uses only as much oil as a couple of good-sized Gulf of Mexico platforms, or 0.4% of the world market, and has purchasing priority in law over all civilian users if necessary. So I was just on a Defense Science Board task force, and they and the Jasons, who are the lead science advisors to the Secretary of Defense, both specifically unrecommended the coal-to-liquids approach, and said if you actually want to free up a lot of oil for the military, invest in civilian efficiency like post office vans. And just the double efficiency Walmart trucks will save ultimately 3 times the oil that the Pentagon uses for everything. But meanwhile, a law came up in Congress that was passed that says if the military does buy synthetic or alternative fuels, they can't be any more carbon intensive than the petroleum-derived fuels.
That's one
Figure
of
it
those
out.
things, you know, in terms of preserving the options for the future. I think the United States ought to be able to look at a whole variety of sources. We don't know what the international situation is going to look like 15 or 20 years from now. You know, we don't know what the world economic situation or the U.S. economic situation is going to be. And so again, I think for the government to be picking the winners and losers at this point in time is really premature.